The name of the Hittites has come down to us from the oldest stories in the Bible, where they appear as a ferocious tribe inhabiting the fringes of the Holy Land. Almost nothing more was known about them until the 19th century, when explorers traveling the empty expanse of central Turkey found a lost city. What they discovered astonished the archaeological world.
Look at it. It's majestic, it's gleaming, and it's over 3,000 years old.
This was Hattusha, the capital city of a forgotten empire, the construction of which was centuries ahead of its time.
I've been very impressed. Some of the building techniques here on site are quite similar to ones you see in modern day.
It was perched on a high plateau and surrounded by impregnable walls. The explorers found evidence of a gigantic pyramid rivaling those of the Egyptians, a network of subterranean tunnels, and an extensive temple complex at the heart of the city dedicated to long-forgotten gods. And overlooking it all was a spectacular regal citadel, once the palace of a dynasty of warrior kings. Why did such an advanced and mighty empire suddenly vanish? Our investigators are going in search of an answer. They want to bring the magnificent city of Hattusha back to life and uncover the secrets of the Hittite civilization. This is the world of the lost superpower of the Bible. This is the lost world of the Hittites. In the desolate and mountainous heartland of Turkey lies Anatolia. Here are the ruins of the capital of the Hittite Empire, the city of Hattusha. Our investigators are here to recreate its appearance during the reign of Hattushili, the last of the Hittite emperors, and to discover if the ruins contain any clues about why this ancient superpower disappeared suddenly and completely. Tessa Dunlop is an historian who studied at Oxford. She'll be examining the records of the Hittites, exploring the heritage of this long-neglected civilization.
For 3,000 plus years, all we had on the Hittites was a couple of references in the Bible. That was it.
Jesse Karp is a structural engineer. He spent several years studying in Turkey, is fluent in Turkish, and is keen to investigate the city's monuments.
In this particular section, the builders used 64,000 bricks, weighing in around 2,500 tons. In its day, this was the state-of-the-art fortification.
4,000 years ago, the Hittites emerged as a powerful tribe that controlled the remote highlands of Anatolia. Over the following 5 centuries, mighty warrior kings extended their territory as far as the Bible lands of the eastern Mediterranean, vanquishing rival dynasties in their expansion. By the 14th century BC, the time of Hattushili, the Hittites had only one comparable rival, the Empire of Egypt, ruled by the pharaoh Ramses. The clash of these two great powers changed the course of history. But whereas Egypt became the most famous civilization of the ancient world, the Hittites completely disappeared. Why? The investigation begins at what was Hattusha's main entrance, the Lion's Gate. Tessa is with archaeologist Julian Bennett. She wants to find out when European explorers first discovered this remote site, known for centuries only from vague travelers' tales and local legends.
Must have been very exciting when they realised they had a lost city, a lost Hittite city on their hands.
Yes, and so superbly well preserved and so large. But they didn't actually start excavating here until the 1890s. That's when the first serious work began here.
But why establish a capital city in such an inhospitable region, more than 6,000 feet above sea level and suffering wide extremes of climate?
So, Tessa, this is the Lion Gate. This is one of the main entrances to the holy city of Hattusha.
They really are magnificent beasts, aren't they?
They are. They've got a marvellously open mouth and a little tongue down there.
You mentioned this place was a city, but what I don't understand is, yes, it would have been easy to defend, but very arid, bleak, awful weather in winter. So why did they live here?
Well, the climate was very different in those days. It would have been much greener, much wetter. There would have been trees all around here. This was rich agricultural land.
In those times, the terrain looked quite different, and so did the approach into the city. Archaeological evidence indicates that the Lion's Gate was flanked by two rectangular towers. The lion was a traditional Hittite symbol of powerful protection. On the perimeter of the city, engineer Jesse Karp has met Bronze Age military specialist Thomas Zimmerman. They're examining Hattusha's virtually impregnable fortifications.
Thomas, what are we walking on here? This looks to be some sort of ancient wall.
Yes, you're perfectly right. We are basically walking on the remnants of one of the oldest fortifications of the Hittite capital, dated to late 17th, 16th century BC.
So if this was a fortification, what are we doing with these empty cavities along this wall?
Looks peculiar, doesn't it? Well, the reason is that this is a so-called casemate wall. It means it consists of two parallel walls, occasionally interrupted by intermediate walls every 2.5 meters, and the cavities are filled up densely with rubble and earth.
So in here, this open cavity, dirt, other debris would come and be compacted here.
Yes, that's exactly the case. This was a pretty efficient way to fortify a city, and efficient enough to withstand attacks with a battering ram.
Using the casemate technique, engineers were able to construct extremely thick and durable walls in far less time than it would take to construct conventional solid walls out of brick. The 20-foot-deep defensive structure had cross-sections every 10 feet, creating a series of box-like cavities. Rubble was packed into these cavities and compacted to form the base of the wall. A modern reconstruction on the site allows Jesse to get a sense of the original scale. On top of the casemate base, this 200-foot-long section was built from 64,000 mud bricks. It weighs 2,500 tons. The wall extended for more than 3.5 miles, enclosing the whole city and requiring a staggering 2.5 million tons of mud, brick and rubble, making it one of the largest structures of its type ever built. Fortifications form just one element of an immense building program believed to have been inaugurated by Prince Hattusili, perhaps the greatest of the Hittite leaders. His most impressive monument guards the south of the city and faces in the direction of Egypt. The extraordinary Yaqapi Rampart is very mysterious. 800 feet long and 250 feet wide, it was once punctuated by towers reached by steep steps. Jesse and Thomas have climbed to the top of the rampart to try and decide what purpose this pyramidal structure served.
Thomas, this looks like it must have been an entrance to a colossal structure.
Yes, indeed. This is part of this monumental structure here, built in the 13th century BC, towards the end of the Hittite Empire. We are standing here in front of the so-called Sphinx Gate, originally flanked by two monumental sphinxes, and traces of the original sculpture are still visible.
I'm thinking a defensive structure. Was that the case?
Well, that's what it was thought to be. But there's another story behind it. Let me show you something.
Directly underneath the rampart, this straight, narrow tunnel extends for almost 300 feet and is one of several leading outside the city beyond the walls.
It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. It's a corbelled arch. I can see the keystones perfectly in line above.
Yes, it's supporting hundreds and thousands of tons of earth, rubble, and stone.
It looks to be a very strong structure. They must have built it on an earth formwork and then removed the earth afterwards.
That's exactly the case. And there's another interesting detail about this. We know that the floor was originally paved with a white coat or plaster to reflect some of the faint light shining in through the entrance.
So to illuminate the path?
Yes, exactly.
It was once thought that the tunnels were used to launch surprise attacks against a besieging enemy. But from the bottom of the rampart, Thomas and Jesse can now see how they might have served a very different purpose.
This is certainly an impressive structure, but now that I'm at the bottom of it, it doesn't appear to be much of a fortification. In fact, perhaps rather an invitation. I mean, it's so easy to climb up here, it doesn't seem very defensive.
That's indeed the case. This is not a defensive structure, but a huge ritual monument. to display the political and religious significance of the Hittite capital. So imagine this as a gigantic stage with the priests approaching through the Sphinx Gate, holding a statue of a deity, and the audience here, the common people, watching the ceremony, brightly dressed, the air filled with music and incense.
So this massive structure here was more ornamentation, more display.
Yes.
Presentation of Hattusha power.
Yes.
But in addition to being used for celebration and ceremony, the pyramid also symbolized something more. A clue was found at the gatehouse in the form of a sphinx, a mythological creature originating from Egypt. In order to understand why the rampart was embellished with Egyptian sphinxes, Tessa decides she needs to see the bigger picture. High above the city, she can clearly see the plateau that Hattusha is built on. More importantly, she can see the Yekapi rampart's imposing position amid the vast Anatolian highlands. And suddenly, it becomes clear why it faced Egypt.
From up here, you really get a sense of the scale and the size of the Yekapa rampart. I mean, just look at it. It's gleaming, it's magnificent, it's enormous. And this is well over 3,000 years old. So just imagine what it must have been like for an Egyptian envoy arriving from the south, and the first thing he sees is that intimidating pyramid.
In the 13th century BC, this is what an Egyptian visiting Hattusha would have seen. A glorious edifice, symbolic of the strength of the Hittite Empire, and a warning to any ambassador that he was dealing not with an inferior, but an equal. But in 1274 BC, the balance of power suddenly changed. The pharaoh Ramses needed to prove himself as the new ruler of Egypt. Eager for glory on the battlefield, the first target of his martial ambition was the Hittite capital. So our investigators will now examine the structures and weapons technology the Prince Hattusili depended on to save Hattusha from disaster. Investigators Tessa Dunlop and Jesse Karp are in Hattusha, capital of the Hittite Empire over 3,000 years ago. They've already recreated the city's remarkable Yekapi pyramid, used for rituals and festivities, and examined the massive walls that surrounded the city with more than 3.5 miles of casemate fortifications. Now they're studying a critical moment that altered the Hittites' world, their greatest battle against their greatest enemy. Hattusha's impressive fortifications ensured the city could withstand almost any attack, but to survive a siege, its engineers had to tap other resources. Engineer Jesse Karp is in the mountains, 2 miles from Hattusha. He's looking for the source of the city's water. It came from springs like this one, high above the city. Today, water from such springs flows into a man-made reservoir. Remarkably, similar reservoirs were created by the Hittites of old. Jesse follows the water down into a valley that now runs parallel to the archaeological site. But the real evidence of how the Hittites engineered their water supply is to be found in the upper city, close to the King's Gate. Here, a network of clay pipes streamed water from the springs to the city. This was the most advanced water supply system of its time. But these pipes could be discovered by an enemy and blocked or poisoned. So to safeguard the water supply, reservoirs were dug inside the walls. Surveys show that this reservoir in the upper city was one of 7. The reservoirs are a wonder of engineering expertise. This one was 200 feet long by 300 feet wide and about 5 feet deep. A base of impermeable rock and sides of clay-lined limestone ensured that only minimal seepage occurred, enabling the reservoir to hold nearly 2 million gallons all the time. This was enough drinking water for a population of 10,000 to survive siege conditions for about 6 months. With Hattusha's defenses in a state of secure readiness, Prince Hattusili left the city in 1274 BC. Having been appointed commander-in-chief of the Hittite army, he set out to face Ramses, pharaoh of Egypt and the most powerful ruler in the ancient world. The dispute was over borders. The Hittite Empire had expanded at a rapid rate and had occupied rich and fertile lands claimed by Egypt. At the border town of Kadesh, the two armies prepared to do battle.
For the first time in Old World history, we have a major battle that was fought between nations, not only rivaling chiefdoms or rivaling cities, but the Hittites on one side and the Egyptians on the other.
For nearly 3,000 years, the only known accounts of the encounter were those carved on Egyptian temple walls. They claimed Ramses won a glorious victory. When Hattusha was discovered, archaeologists found thousands of writing tablets. Would the accounts agree? First, the tablets had to be deciphered. Tessa Dunlop is examining the Hittite records in the Regional Museum.
Now this is a cuneiform tablet. And if you look very closely, you can see a series of intricate impressions which have been cut with the end of a reed. And each one of those impressions represents a syllable or a sound. And what they did was, last century, they called in a group of experts to try and crack the codes that these impressions formed.
After years of painstaking work, scholars eventually decoded the tablets and discovered an enormous wealth of information, including the Hittite account of the Battle of Kadesh.
The Battle of Kadesh, which famously the Egyptian pharaoh Ramses referred to as his country's most impressive victory, when you refer to the Hittite records, you get a very different story about that same battle.
The Hittite account describes how Ramses was tricked by Hattusili into dividing his massive army in two. So as he approached Kadesh, the Hittites, who were supposed to be many miles away, struck his army with their powerful force of chariots. At first, the Hittite charioteers almost overwhelmed the Egyptians, and Ramses was nearly killed. However, the timely arrival of reinforcements saved the pharaoh's life. When Ramses returned home, he ordered his temple scribes to record this dramatic turnaround and the way he had personally changed the course of the battle to deliver an heroic Egyptian victory. But was the pharaoh telling the truth? Tessa is with archaeologist Julian Bennett, finding out about the Hittites' version of events.
The Egyptian pharaohs were renowned for their mastery of propaganda, and Ramses really went to town over the Battle of Kadesh, because interestingly, the Hittites contradict him, don't they?
They do, in a sense. I mean, Ramses' record is a public record. It's for the Egyptian people to know. I mean, really, we did win this battle. We didn't really lose it. But the Hittite records, these are the official records. They're not for public consumption. They're more objective in that sense.
So, despite what Ramesses said, the Egyptians got a bloody nose from the Hittites under the general Hattusili.
Oh, very much so.
The victory over the preeminent foreign power had major consequences at home. By saving Kadesh from the Egyptian onslaught, Hattusili became a national hero. But according to the Hittite records, the king, Hattusili's own nephew, resented his uncle's success and began to plot his downfall. Hattusili decided to act, to break the Hittites' most sacred rule and seize the throne for himself. The Hittites had strict rules governing dynastic succession. They held the empire together peacefully and coherently. But in 1265 BC, breaking the tradition, Prince Hattusili seized the throne from his unpopular nephew, King Mutawalli.
Hattusili III is a person who was very conscientious, who was very troubled. He felt he had to take power because he felt that this was what was needed to save the empire.
Despite widespread support for his action, by deposing the rightful ruler and declaring himself king, Hattusili had broken one of the Hittites' most sacred laws. And atonement for his crime may have been the reason that he decided to completely rebuild Hattusha's holiest temple. With archaeologist Julian Bennett, historian Tessa Dunlop now investigates the temple site for evidence of the rituals that once took place here.
This really does look enormous. I mean, can you help me get my bearings?
Well, this is a really massive temple structure. We've just come through the main gateway there, a ceremonial gateway.
Everywhere I look, there's something that catches your eye, because, I mean, first off, it's got to be this.
Tessa has spotted the most baffling object on the site, the green stone, once believed to be a meteorite.
This is the famous green stone.
And it just begs you to touch it. It's got that luminous and very smooth surface.
It's been polished by so many people coming here.
But it begs the question, what on earth is it doing here?
Good question. It's a local stone. There's no doubt about that. It's not come from the heavens or anything like that. But it is true that some of the tablets from here talk about ritual stones or holy stones, something like that, and this could very well have been one of them.
Further into the temple complex is the inner sanctum, surrounded by some of the largest stone blocks in the whole city.
Well, this is the outer wall of the temple, and you can see where they've actually carved pillars, in a sense, in the limestone blocks here.
They're absolutely enormous, aren't they?
They are. Some of these blocks are 20 tons, easily. I mean, massive blocks of limestone.
If they were that big, how on earth did they get them up here?
A lot of human labour involved in this. Probably some slave, but quite possibly some free labour as well.
Inside the inner sanctum is a courtyard that was probably once an open sanctuary. And beyond this lies the Holy of Holies, shrine of the Storm Father, Teshub, and his wife, the Sun Mother.
This is one of the two cult rooms, and you can see it's the same type of green stone again.
It's almost the perfect square. It's a very intimate little space, isn't it?
It is. And we can see at the far end a statue base here. This was the temple to Teshub and his consort. Hittite tablets tell us something about the statues themselves. There is one tablet that talks about the statue of Teshub being a statue of gold.
In recreating the ground plan of the great temple complex, we can see that it was the largest building in the city, 200 feet long by 140 feet wide. And within its inner sanctum, we can locate precisely where Teshub the storm god and his consort, the Sun Mother, were venerated, in sanctuaries only accessible to the king, queen, and officials of the highest rank. A few hundred yards away, engineer Jesse Karp has gone in search of the source of the rock used to lay the main temple's massive foundations. He's found an outcrop of rock where the Hittites hewed the 20-ton blocks they required.
I'm here at Kesikaya, which is Turkish for stone cutting. And essentially, this is an ancient Hittite quarry. And what you see here is a crack. Ancient Hittites likely put wood wedges in here and exposed them to water, expanding the wood and breaking off large segments of limestone.
At the local Quorum Museum, archaeologist Thomas Zimmerman shows our investigator Jesse Karp a reconstruction of the great temple's walls.
This is obviously a cross-section of an old Hittite building. Can you tell me a bit more about the building methods they may have used?
Sure. So it basically consists of a limestone foundation and a wooden timber frame with mud bricks as the superstructure, covered by a flat roof laid out with timbers and sealed off with mud.
In modern construction, we take our homes and we bolt them to the foundations. Is that what they're doing here?
Yes, exactly. What you see here is a double hole, just prepared to fix the wooden frame on the limestone foundation.
Now, thousands of years ago, how would they have made that hole?
With a bronze drill.
To see how the drill worked, Jesse now joins a local guide, Anna Nozel.
What we have here is a replica of an ancient Hittite drill. The Hittites could drill up to 3 inches an hour using this device. We'll demonstrate how it was used.
The drill has a bronze bit that bores into the hard rock, slowly making a tubular hole that was used as a fixing point for the temple's wooden framework and mud brick walls. From detailed research, we can now reconstruct how the Hittites created their great temple. They began with huge limestone blocks to make a rubble-filled casemate foundation. To this, they attached a wooden framework, which was filled in with rows of mud brick and covered with plaster, creating walls 6 feet thick and 40 feet high. The gigantic maze of the Great Temple was one of the most imposing edifices of the ancient world. These statues of the Sun Mother and Storm Father represented far more than mere idols. They were considered to be the living representations of the gods on earth.
The tablets also tell us about the ritual involved with the statues of the gods. Every day they had to be washed, they had to be clothed. One of them had a cloth of gold, we know that from the tablets. They had to be given food, they had to be entertained and so forth. So this was a very controlled and very structured religious system.
But the storm father and sun mother weren't the only gods in the Hittite pantheon. In the uppermost part of Hattusha are the remains of more than 30 buildings. 3,500 years ago, these were once temples, each dedicated to the gods of a conquered people. Hattusili's young wife, Puduhepa, was a priestess from a kingdom conquered by the Hittites. When her people became part of the empire, their deities became incorporated into the Hittite religion.
The Hittite Empire had a wide range of people of different backgrounds. They weren't all Hittites. We call them Hittites, but they were all different people, different groups, different gods.
So it's a sort of conglomeration of lots of different gods to please the vassals as well as the original gods.
Precisely.
Because of this coalescence of deities, the Hittites were called the people of 1,000 gods. But it wasn't only religious practice that united the different peoples of the empire. More important still was the overarching legal system.
In terms of law, well, you know the common phrase that the Hittites are known as the people of the 1,000 gods. One could also say the Hittites are the people of the 1,000 laws, since law permeated every aspect of Hittite life.
Hittite law was rich and detailed and covered every aspect of life, from divorce to the legal limits of the king's authority. And unlike any other civilization of their time, the Hittites had an evolving legal system that was more concerned with practicality than punishment.
One of the tablets tells us, or gives us a very good example of the Hittite view of law, which was to compensate. And it tells us basically that if you accidentally burn down your neighbour's house, you build him a new house. So it's this idea of compensation, not retribution. It's very important, very progressive.
The most significant component of Hittite law was treaty making. Shrewd diplomacy was their best secret weapon. In forging their empire, they gave rivals and adversaries a choice. Join us peacefully, or we will crush you absolutely. Many conquests were achieved without a single sword being drawn. Their noblest treaty, considered to be the world's first international peace accord, is now housed in Istanbul, the Turkish city that sits between Europe and Asia. Here, Tessa Dunlop discovers the clandestine motives that lay behind the treaty, and small hints that will help to explain why the Hittite Empire vanished from history. Our investigators are attempting to discover what happened to Hattusha, fabulous capital city of the Hittites, an ancient people from the time of the Bible. So far, they've plumbed some of the deepest secrets of Hittite engineering and recreated what their most glorious buildings and fortifications looked like more than 3,000 years ago. Tessa Dunlop has traveled to Istanbul, now the biggest city in Turkey, to find out why, at what seemed to be the height of its power, the Hittite Empire suddenly vanished.
I'm here in the heart of Istanbul, which is frequently known as the cradle of civilization. But in fact, the first politically united empire in Anatolia, which is really the largest part of modern-day Turkey, was the Hittite Empire. Now, obviously, they never came to Istanbul. It didn't exist at the time, but now some of their greatest treasures reside here.
Istanbul is a city of vibrant contrasts, situated at the junction between Asia to the east and Europe to the west. Amid the hubbub, Tessa is heading for the Istanbul Archaeological Museum, a haven of calm that conserves what many consider to be one of the most important documents ever written. It's the Treaty of Kadesh, composed 16 years after the battle between the Hittite and Egyptian empires. Tessa is with Professor Ali Dinçal, one of the world's leading Hittite scholars.
Professor Dinçal, this is the Kadesh Treaty. But I wonder, why was it signed so much later than the battle itself?
Only after Hattusili stabilized the political events in Anatolia, he could make a treaty with Egypt.
I see. So in other words, Hattusili had to make sure he was strong at home before he could look outwards.
Yes.
Did the treaty actually work?
Well, yes. because no aggression has happened after the treaty until the fall of the Hittite Empire.
The Treaty of Kadesh ushered in an era of peace between the two superpowers of the day. With the Egyptians as their allies, the Hittites had nothing to fear from anyone in the world. But inside the empire itself, a new danger was growing. Having deposed the rightful occupant of the throne, Hattusili had made powerful enemies who wanted the crown themselves and used his coup as a precedent. To protect himself and his family from the risk of treachery, he began work on his most ambitious building project, a spectacular citadel. Here, engineer Jesse Karp is with archaeologist Elif Denel, investigating what is called locally the Buyukale. Perched on a high plateau and protected by steep cliff faces, the citadel had superb natural defenses that were further enhanced by walls as heavily fortified as those that guarded the city. Along its entranceway was yet another line of defense, the barracks of the royal bodyguard, the Bears of the Golden Lance, whose sworn duty was to protect the king and his heirs.
The king's security would have lived here. Do we have any idea of if they were there 24 hours a day? This was, a constant kind of presence in this courtyard?
Well, not just the courtyard. Probably everywhere there was protection.
Okay.
The protection of the king was very important. I mean, this is completely naturally protected. Along these sides, there are natural rock droppings all around. Of course, there were walls as well. So this is a very well-secured area. That's why the king probably chose to live here. Also, it has a really good command of the area all around the citadel.
There's quite an extraordinary view, actually. You can see pretty much panoramic across the valley.
Everything the king needed was to be found within this high-security compound, including what archaeologists think was his family's private temple, nicknamed the King's Swimming Pool.
So, in the day of the Hittites, we wouldn't see trees here. This would have been a ceremonial pool.
Yeah, the structure we're standing in was actually walled all around and roofed. And there was an opening right on top of this pool.
Okay. And today we're just walking on the foundation.
Exactly.
Although thousands of Hittite religious texts have been translated, the true function of this pooled chamber still eludes archaeologists. The cleansing rituals thought to have been performed here by the royal family are still a mystery, but the purpose of another building is much clearer.
This foundation structure looks very different than some of the other stuff around it.
Yes, this building was built on a huge platform wall around here. And it functioned as the reception hall of the king. There would have been 5 walls here supporting the floor above us that had 5 rows of 5 columns in the area where the king would be expecting his visitors.
So this was essentially a meeting place for foreign dignitaries, other important visitors to meet the king.
Exactly.
The grand reception hall was over 30 yards square. 25 columns supported its high roof. Here, Hattusili would greet the rulers of his vassal states, as well as hear envoys from the great foreign powers of the day, such as Egypt. Beyond it are the remains of the king's own residence, the private quarters he occupied with his family and most trusted servants.
We may be looking at the king's actual residence right now.
Do we have any idea of how he might have lived here? Was he living with servants, his family?
Well, he obviously had servants, and he had a wife, and he had concubines. It is possible that they all lived together here.
It's certainly an amazing location to have your palace.
Hittite royal women lived in secluded isolation, and we know very little about Hattusili's concubines and their children. The exception is Pudehepa, Hattusili's formidable spouse, who played a more active role in public life than any queen before or after her.
She definitely was a very strong woman. She was clearly really well educated. She knew how to deal with international relations, and she knew how to run the country in a way, because she was able to influence a significant aspect of it.
Puduhepa's influence helped to make this palace complex the center of the empire. Its entrance flanked by bodyguards and officials, it was a city within a city, containing a temple and a reception hall that would have been perpetually thronged with visitors from around the ancient world. Perched on its plateau and surrounded by sheer cliffs, it was a site that dominated the city, the greatest masterwork of Hattusili's long reign. But the palace did not endure. Like the rest of the city, it would soon fall. And our investigators are now going in search of who or what caused this sudden and cataclysmic end. Our investigators are in Hattusha, lost city of the Hittites. They're exploring its monumental structures, trying to work out why this once glorious city disappeared from history. Engineer Jesse Karp is about a mile northeast of Hattusha with archaeologist Elif Denel. They're marveling at the beautiful rock sanctuary of Yazilikaya, a place thought to have been conceived by Hattusili, one of the Hittites' last and greatest kings, and his wife, Puduhepa.
Now we're entering the open-air sanctuary of Yazilikaya.
This is amazing. There's reliefs and inscriptions all over these rocks.
Yes, these are reliefs of gods and goddesses, gods on this side and goddesses on the right.
Well, do we know what they represented or why they were built?
This whole sanctuary is dedicated to the storm god. It's the procession of all the gods and goddesses towards the central figure here, to the storm god. This is a new pantheon that Puduhepa, Hattusili III's wife, brought from Cilicia, south of the empire, when she came to marry the king.
Puduhepa attempted to divide the empire's 1,000 gods into simpler groups of similar deities. It seems to have been an attempt to unify the empire, but other factors appear to have been pulling it apart. Puduhepa's husband, the great King Hattusili III, victor of Kadesh and maker of peace with Egypt, died in 1237 BC. His burial place has never been found, but within the rock sanctuary of Yazilikaya is a funerary chamber carved by order of his grandson. This concealed chamber lies through a narrow passageway hewn through solid rock, and it provides the most important clue as to when the Hittite Empire disappeared, because it's the last known monument to be constructed by the people of Hattusha.
What have we got here?
We're in the rock sanctuary built by Hattusili III's grandson, the last Hittite king.
Does this mean the empire was in a state of decline?
Well, we know that the empire fell during the reign of Hattusili's grandson.
From the decoding of the inscriptions within this chamber, archaeologists believe the Hittite Empire came to an abrupt end 3 decades after Hattusili's reign. Seeking more information about why Hattusili's grandson was the last ever Hittite king, Julian Bennett takes Tessa Dunlop to an obscure inscribed stone called Nishantash.
What exactly is Nishantash?
Nishantash is a Turkish word. It means the marked stone, and this is the marked stone here.
So for those who can actually decipher it, what does it say?
Well, the inscription actually reads right to left, and it tells us about the victories or various conquests of the grandson of Hattusilis. It talks about a sea.
But many of the battles listed here are not conquests enlarging the empire, but what appear to be civil wars within it. Hattusili's heirs were struggling to hold their dynasty together. Further evidence of the way the end came to Hattusha is being pursued by Jesse Karp. He's with Elif Denel, standing in the ruins of the Royal Archives. It once housed thousands of clay tablets. The way in which they were accidentally preserved provides us with the crucial evidence of what befell the city.
They found thousands of clay tablets here burnt in a huge fire that caused the roof to collapse and bake the entire structure. We have evidence for that This is a piece of burnt mud brick from the walls of this building.
So essentially, if the roof collapsed, you build up lots of heat. It's like a kiln.
Exactly.
Does the fact that the tablets were preserved and left behind give us any indication of how the city might have come to an end or why people were leaving?
We know that this fire happened right around the time of abandonment. Whether it happened right before or right after is not quite clear yet.
Not only the archives, but the whole of Hattusili's glorious palace and many other buildings were consumed by a great fire that swept through the city. But how did it start? Archaeologists have found no evidence that the walls were breached by a foreign enemy. This supports the notion that the fire broke out when the Hittites turned on each other.
My personal opinion is that it was probably something from within, some sort of internal strife, perhaps a civil war. I think there was an attempt to take the throne, perhaps by multiple people, and in essence, the empire fell apart.
By seizing the throne, Hattusili had set a dangerous precedent that seems to have triggered civil war 30 years after his death, as rival factions tore the empire apart, each making a violent bid for power. The capital abandoned, and no faction strong enough to reunite the empire, the entire region was plunged into chaos.
These were very dark times. Terrible shortage of food, other violent populations on the move looking for a home.
But although Hattusha vanished seemingly overnight, remnants of Hittite civilization persisted. In the 12th century BC, the Lion's Gate had been Hattusha's main entrance, and the lion was one of the most potent symbols in Hittite culture. 4 centuries later, the descendants of the Hittites were still carving almost identical statues of lions in Canaan, the homeland of the Hittites of the Bible.
This lion dates from the 8th century BC, a good 400 or so years after the collapse of the Hittite Empire in Hattusha. And yet look at it, it's strongly reminiscent of those lions that flanked the Lion's Gate in Hattusha itself. And this is because although the original kingdom had collapsed, so-called Neo-Hittites continued to exist in parts of Syria. And this find very much tallies with the biblical references to the Hittites, when they're referred to as Canaanite tribes who existed alongside the Israelites at the time of King David.
Whatever the truth of their biblical connections, what is clear is that the people we now call Hittites built one of the most amazing cities in the Near East. A city that reached its height under Hattusili and boasted such monuments as the Yakapi Rampart, the great temple of the storm god, and the royal citadel. Yet all its security measures were not sufficient to protect Hattusili's dynasty from the consequences of his seizure of power. And in the space of a single generation, Hattusha became a lost world, a city and a civilization we have only now been able to recreate, 3,000 years after it disappeared from history.